Bonsoir. Je dois admettre que j'ai hésité un tout petit peu de parler ici parce que c'est une exception d'exception. Parce que déjà, le thème donc, que j'ai choisi, la science-fiction soviétique des années 20, n'a pas vraiment un registre de postcolonial, de la pensée postcoloniale. And then unfortunately I will continue in English because all the texts and the work and the exhibition I curated were in English, so I will continue in English. There are some reasons why I think the topics of science fiction of the 20s can relate to what we are discussing here. Because there's some questions of space which are quite interesting. So the questions of space, because what happens actually if we leave behind the geography of the Earth and look at what happened and what kind of spatial references art creates or created back then. And there was another moment we found quite appealing to for our project. Why actually art at that time, what kind of modernism, what kind of vision of modernism this art created? And I'm talking, when I say science fiction of the 20s, 30s, I'm talking about literature. So I'm talking about the huge literary production, which was extremely influential actually in the 20s, 30s. It coexisted with the Russian avant-garde and partly overlapped with the socialist realism. So what happened with this material? So we, in 2012, I curated an exhibition entitled Zero Gravity Revolt with Nikolai Oleynikov, who you might know. He is a member of Что делать collective based in St. Petersburg. So it was a very experimental project, because it was not an exhibition, the classical model of the show. So we had a workshop with a choreographer, including dance, including movement. There was a mural, several things were produced, and most notably several fictional texts, one of which we will perform today. So that's why I invited Marie Zabukovic, who is a student at the Conservatoire d'Art Dramatique, to perform this text. So I have to clarify a little bit the stages of the text. So this text was collectively written by all the participants of the exhibition. And this collective writing process was a part of the show. So there were 12 artists involved in the exhibition. And my own authorship, let's say, as curator in this whole process was not quite classical either. So I was basically doing what everybody else was doing. So I was participating in the collective writing, in the workshop, and in the levitation workshop. So in many things, curators do not usually participate. And every exhibition, and another thing which interests me a lot, as curator, what is the memory of the show? So what remains, because we're talking about Magiciens, so what remains once the exhibition is gone? Because the exhibition is an ephemeral thing. And today, of course, there's this expanded practice of curating. Basically, I ask myself if an exhibition can be narrated, and if so, in which way? So what we're doing here today is really an experiment of an experiment, based on material which is not exactly plugging in, like in the most obvious way, into the post-colonial discourse, but I will try to create bridges, and I hope you will be patient with us. So we will start with the first paragraph of our text.
We all remember that day. The day we looked into the sky that became red of pollution and had no stars. And at last we saw some hope, in the form of a banner of intergalactic union projected into the clouds. The day when, for a couple of hours, everything stopped on planet Earth, because all the nations glued to their media screens, watching the last news report. That was the day the interplanetary agreement was finally signed after a year of hesitation. And the strongest galactic coalitions, at that point, Earth, Moon, and Venus, for the first time greeted each other with two flaps on the shoulder. That's where our new history began. No one could predict what it will be like, living our lives from now on. Of course, no one would even imagine that it could spread into a revolution.
So as you can see from the beginning, our model of this exhibition and of our reflection is the classical dystopia. And in the Soviet science fiction, there is no dystopia as such. So most narration is utopian. But what we were interested in, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk you through our internal process of creation and the questions we were asking ourselves. Because the first question to ask was how to use it and was to use it, because it was research, but it was not an academic research. So it was a kind of artistic research. We were searching for what we could use for our own project. What kind of characters, so what kind of stories, what kind of situations. And but there were broader theoretical questions we were asking ourselves. So one question we were especially interested in is what kind of version of modernism the science fiction was constructing. And of course we're talking about the 20s, 30s. So, and basically what happened is that the Occidental modernism was modernized even further. And the science fiction was the main genre which was promoting it and sort of like also trying to spread it. And what the other questions we were looking at is what is the link between the modernism, this version of modernism, and the progress, the future, and is it translated into other languages? And basically, so we looked at several examples that coexisted. So we'll stop there and I will tell you, just to facilitate sort of the understanding, how the entire story goes. So based on all that reflections and based on all these questions, we wrote a story. So the story goes as follows. The Earth becomes unlivable because it is too polluted. The elites of the Earth decide to create a gated community on the Moon and to move there to a controlled artificial environment. But to that point, the solar system is already populated, and there are different civilizations on the Moon, on the Venus, with different social systems. On Venus, we have a sort of communist, feminist government, and on the Moon, a rather totalitarian one. An agreement is negotiated between Earth, Moon, and Venus. The gated community is built, and the elites move over. But it is boring out there, and they decide to invite artists. The cheapest solution is to host them in a small satellite, the Cocoon, rotating around the Moon.
We were just usual nomads of the arts, mostly jobless youth with a couple of addictions and fears, trained to make our living somehow. Of course, when someone comes up to you and asks politely if you would like to have a proper creative job, that wouldn't conflict with your ideas. You think that is not such a big deal to live to the Moon? What would we get here? Dying planets that reminds of an hot oven, overpopulation, where soon we will sit on each other's heads, and the notion that somewhere, there's a bigger piece of a tot. And what is this question, if I prefer to live to the moon or to China? I heard that on the moon you could fly, or at least try to hang yourself in space. That's pretty awesome. And even if I have to entertain the government workers, there's plenty time for myself. Do whatever, easy life. I am not entirely sure how it's organized out there, but I hope my insurance would cover everything extraordinary that could happen. And besides, what's there in China that I haven't seen before?
And so as we're progressing with our questions, there was this image or this metaphor of levitation that emerged. And we asked ourselves how to connect levitation and labor, or levitation and work. Is there kind of like a feasible connection for our narrative? And levitation is, of course, a condition of zero gravity. But it is also connected to other things, to flight or to free fall. And you certainly know the text by Hito Steil called In Free Fall, who talks about the deep changes in imagining actually the world that occurs today, and it describes the current condition as groundlessness, which we believed quite relevant sort of to our concerns. She also talks about the metaphor of flight becoming dominant metaphor of the age of globalization. So today flight has become quite omnipresent, actually, of like a mode of globalized existence. Of course, not for everybody, and of course, it is still a very privileged condition. However, we decided to think about it, and sort of we realized that, of course, there is this connection. So we fly to work, and we work while flying, and we wanted to think about this normalization of it, let's say, what it makes appear and what it conceals. So our answer, sort of within our system, within our narrative, was the Cocoon. The Cocoon is a satellite where the artists are located. And it is a kind of dystopia of levitation. So it is dystopia of levitation and mobility. Because it is a place, the way we conceived it, of some kind of never-ending creative work. So, and it is a kind of creative prison, so 24 hours of working time and no gravity.
You want to know how did it look inside of the cocoon? There's nothing that could describe it. It's like being inside of your own brain, just with a bunch of other people. Now you have this questioning look. I'm not mad, it's just you won't understand. Probably no one will. No, I don't keep contact with anyone from the cocoon. What I'm gonna say to them, I heard about these gatherings or Facebook groups or even fan clubs. Join the groups of the cocooners, something like that. Mostly the ones that have been there are pretty reserved now. If we recognize each other in the streets, we will probably bow or say how. But there's nothing to talk about. Everyone lived in his own hell of endless creativity.
So in our system, gravity becomes a luxury good. So there's still some gravity on the moon, and the gated community is using it. And in the satellite, there's no gravity, because it is rotating on the orbit. So in the 1920s, the relationship between the humans and gravity is the opposite one. And in being good students of Bruno Latour, we asked ourselves what the relationship between the nature and the human could be or could represent. And also that was the question we asked our sources, so the texts of the science fiction of the 20s. And we found that there's a lot of this kind of like a discourse of overcoming gravity, so of fighting gravity. So the relationship between the humans and the nature is quite a hostile one, like it's explicitly hostile. And we took gravity as a kind of representation of it. So there's a lot of talk about how to fight gravity, that the humankind should fight gravity. And this is actually an incredible task. And what it proves at the end is, of course, the progress and the victory of the reason, because it is via reason that the mechanisms are constructed and sort of like the gravity is overcame, and then the people can fly into space. Now, our next questions, after having realized all that and included it somehow in our own way into the narrative, we decided to ask the next question to, again, our sources. So what is the image of the human? So how the humans are represented? So is there a differentiation between the human and the non-human? And this is when we have the appearance of the artist as a romantic hero in space.
He was no better than any of us. He just happened to have this certain knowledge in a certain place and use it, in that case. Train himself to levitate. All this underground fighting, apparently he ran some kind of a wushu class on Earth. Or it could be boxing. If I carefully think about it, he seemed to have this quality to freak people out a bit, make them feel uncomfortable around him. When he started disappearing at nights, we decided it could be explained by any kind of a project he might be in or involved with the government, special task, or maybe he was in charge of keeping an eye of the functioning of the cocoon we used to live in. They needed someone inside to check our stability, like a thermometer or a spy. There was no fuss, no security alarmed the escapes, so they should have been legal escapes. That's what I think.
So as a matter of fact, we struggled a lot with this image of the artist as a romantic hero in space, because we looked for some examples, and then the question was, is he or she supposed to be human or not, and like to what degree? And while looking for examples, we discovered quite an interesting things, which is extremely present in this very famous science fictional movie you certainly know, Aelita, based on a novel by Alexei Tolstoy in 1924. So there's this image of the Queen of Mars, Aelita, and the humans go, the Soviets basically go to Mars, sort of like, and they started revolution there. And then we asked ourselves, like, in how far Aelita is a human, and there are no clear indications. So there are no clear indications. It's very sort of like ambiguous. On the one hand, she's obviously humanoid, but the costumes which were created by the constructivists, so it is a very famous kind of constructivist dystopia. So they don't quite help her and others, inhabitants of Mars, to look human. So we don't quite know. And then of course there's this other question. Well, we can't tell sort of like how they think. So looking further, we realized that creating some sort of like convincing extraterrestrial in this writing in the 20s was absolutely not on the top of the agenda. They were not interested in it. They were interested in the social fiction. And they were not interested in the distinction, which became extremely important like in the 60s and also in other areas of the world. So they don't care. everybody, like civilizations they describe, like on Mars and on the Moon, they are they could be as different civilizations of Earth, on Earth. They absolutely don't put any effort in exoticizing them beyond human. So it still becomes looks like a sort of like a global geography, let's say, and this variety, this degree of distinction. What we did, we decided that for our system, for our logic, in the logic of the project, we keep the artist human, but the others will be hybrids, sort of like between human and plant, or between human and animal. And there is a story of attraction between a human hero, the artist, and a female with ambiguous humanity. So, with completely different consequences that the science fiction actually creates out of this conflict.
The whole story looks extremely romantic. You might have heard about these Venusian women that spread the revolution around. So, they met in fighting club on the opposite side of the ring, saw each other, and started the fight, as it was meant to. But what happened next, no one can explain. So neither of them could win, and neither of them could lose. So the fight lasted forever. Just went on and on until the explosion happened. The way I'm telling you this story is very dry and laconic, but the ones that were at the actual happening imply that nothing they have seen before in their lives can be compared in beauty to this show. And then the explosion came. Other people think it is a story of ego and window dressing. We had such a tasty place in this Cocoon, and this bastard had to rip it all into pieces. I'm telling you, grab your pieces and sit still, then it's going to be all safe and sound. But these idiots, no, he decided to be special.
I think I will stop here. And I would, if you have questions, then yes, anytime. But I could continue, of course, elaborating on how it connects to modernism and to universalism, but I think I would prefer kind of reactive mode rather than sort of my own discourse.
I really want to ask you a question. The science fiction of a failed utopia, which is also a failed or at least disappeared empire, being discussed as in a sort of double future, where it's the future of this disappeared utopian empire discussing a dystopian future of that future in a way. What did that produce among all of you? I mean, did you find yourselves mirrored in this fiction that you were creating? Were you able to escape going into great detail about, what's happening sort of now, or what you saw staring in your face? Did you really take off somewhere else, or were you really locked into an allegory of what seems to be coming to planetary civilization now?
Yes, it was a kind of a conscious decision, and what we liked about it, it was this kind of radical difference. It is an exception of exception, so it is already a very strange version of modernism. It is radicalized modernism. And it is a political modernism, not the economic one. So what they construct is this a kind of society which is which goes beyond, so the progress is even more radical than the Occidental one. So it is an exception to the Occidental modernism somehow, which is somewhere there in this kind of outer space. Nobody can actually kind of theorize and make part of a bigger discourse, and it remains in the strange space of like non-theoretization. Because of many reasons. And these texts are also not translated. There are a couple of books in Russian, they're not translated because of many reasons. Because firstly, they have nothing to do with the high literature of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, right? So it is a kind of like a B-series type of narration, and they were very much related to the propaganda. So because what they spread, well, and then we looked also at the geography of space, what kind of geography they create. So geography is a solar system, so they never go beyond solar system. They go to what they already know. And what they go to do, what they do there, they spread modernism. So this radical version of modernism, which is communism, of course, like back then. And we were interested in the connection of this extreme fiction and extreme politics, which was quite incredible in a way. So because the narration reproduces the situation in Russia, so it is a kind of extrapolated Trotskyism, so they spread revolution all over the solar system. And normal plot, because there are many, the production was huge, so nobody knows about it. They were at a certain stage as production competed with socialist realism, with Gorky. So they were really, really kind of very much appreciated by Lenin, and then later on even by Stalin. He quite liked those guys, who were producing all that. Yes, and then basically we looked at what exactly they were spreading, and of course, from the point of view of the Occidental modernist narratives, it looks like a crazy exception and even more radical one. And of course, it was very interesting just to follow all that, to research and sort of to see what we could use. And basically, as a kind of radical backdrop, of course, it allows a different questioning and allows also interesting questions, all this kind of levitation thing. Then the progress is very, very interesting, and then the relationship between the human of the nature. We realized that strangely enough, it opens a lot of questions within this Anthropocene sort of discussion we're having today. So that was quite a big surprise, let's say. And it was not easy to work with it. We didn't want also to quote stupidly, kind of heavily, some sort of obvious things. But we decided, since the project already was quite experimental, so the material which was based on was also quite experimental. So we decided to create some sort of mix out of it, relevant today for our question. And here, of course, we were talking about, this idealized mobility of the artist today. And of course, it also talks about that. Also, we wanted to include it into our investigation.
C'est plus moi qui ai la cravate, mais je vais quand même parler pour notre pays maintenant. Dans notre pays, il y a deux choses que j'aimerais rappeler parce que c'est... Merci. Dans notre pays, la littérature a des règles. Elle a des règles par genre, le genre de la science-fiction, qu'elle soit dystopique ou utopique. Et ces règles, dans notre pays en tout cas, servent à éviter que la littérature devienne une illustration du réel ou une illustration de certaines valeurs prédéfinies. Et donc on a voté une loi au ministère de l'Assemblement qui exige que chaque auteur, avant de publier, c'est une sorte de censure, et chaque lecteur, avant d'acheter un livre, autrement il doit payer une amende. Une fois qu'il l'a acheté, il doit revenir 3 semaines après pour le dire. Et la question à laquelle doivent répondre aussi bien les écrivains que les lecteurs, c'est qu'est-ce que vous avez découvert ou Qu'est-ce que vous savez maintenant, après rédaction ou après lecture, que vous ne saviez pas avant, que vous n'arriviez pas à penser ou que vous n'arriviez pas à sentir? Et donc il y a des garde-fous, qui sont les directives des genres littéraires, avec cette idée que lorsqu'on lit ou lorsqu'on écrit, on s'éprouve soi-même, et donc, idéalement, à la fin de la rédaction, on trouve autre chose que les idées qu'on y avait mis au départ. Donc dans mon pays, ce genre d'expérimentation, on vous demanderait, mais alors qu'est-ce que vous avez appris que vous ne saviez pas avant d'écrire cette fiction? Est-ce que vous avez retrouvé le même Latour à la fin de la nouvelle qu'au début? C'est la première... disons, si j'amène mes lois dans ce pays-là, c'est ce qui m'apparaît. L'autre loi que nous avons édictée, et ça je me tourne vers Pedro, c'est que l'art n'est pas seulement, ou ne doit pas être seulement, une forme de réparation symbolique, de catastrophes, de désastres, etc. Et on a construit dans un immense endroit ce qu'on appelle les archives des bienfaits. Donc, en gros, je vous donne quelques exemples. Le dernier tyrannosaure, pour nous c'est très bien. La première viande cuite, c'est vraiment un moment mémorable. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a d'autre? J'ai quelques exemples. Le premier cheval monté, c'est pas rien. Etc., etc. Et donc, du coup, toutes ces dates qui sont des catastrophes, elles rendent mémorables des choses qui sont de l'ordre du traumatisme, de l'ordre du désastre collectif. Et donc, on a essayé de valoriser, par le biais de politiques publiques très intrusives dans la vie mentale de nos sujets, l'idée que l'art peut aussi être quelque chose d'une force de proposition instituante, positive. Et on a réfléchi à faire des biennales d'art contemporain ou même des quadriennales d'art contemporain comme à Cassel, par exemple. Et on s'est aperçu que, en fait, Cassel avait été aussi construit sur une ville qui avait été bombardée durant la Seconde Guerre mondiale, et que cette foire d'art contemporain était déjà une forme de réparation. Et donc, on ne pouvait pas opposer Cassel à Bhopal ou Tchernobyl, parce que Cassel, c'est déjà à la fois la catastrophe et la réparation de la catastrophe. Et donc on s'est dit, bon, ça a l'air d'être un peu plus compliqué que ce qu'on pensait, donc on ne fait pas de foire d'art contemporain dans notre pays.
Well, there are several questions, but one is very interesting, for the art world today, because there's a lot of discussion today about the status of the artist's fiction. Because there are several exhibitions, notably there was one big show at the MAGBA, curated by Chus Martinez, about what kind of fiction the artists create, what are the reasons, can it be compared to literature, to what extent, does it have any literary value or not? And all these questions are open because they are all new. Is it some kind of like conceptual fiction, so some kind of like invention? So the way we used it, well, we did not, this text was not used in the exhibition. So this text was basically an outil, sort of like a tool to create other things. So to create the mural. And in addition, the exhibition itself was constructed as an educational project. So the artist I worked with and myself, we invited 12 students. So what we did was a collaborative project which was supposed to function also as a kind of a school. And as maybe unusual as you might find, we decided this kind of material would allow us to talk about other things and to talk about today in, let's say, an original way, in an unexpected way, to talk about today's problems in an unexpected way. And that is supposed to create an educational value. So the texts we wrote and conceived were not to be exhibited. So, but for today's presentation, I decided to conduct this experiment and to somehow exhibit this text. So while commenting it, so which, up to you to judge whether it worked or not, which could also, which allowed me to tell the exhibition, to narrate an exhibition in a different way than running the images behind me and commenting each image. So this image represents this, the other image represents that. So it is a different way. So this is what I actually, that's the logic behind it.
Should I answer to this or no? No, it's an extreme scenario, this idea of the disaster, but it's one that, on the one hand, it has to do with what Malek brought up, the mechanics of the art world, the global art world. The reason why I'm doing this really in connection to Haiti and Beirut and Havana is because people who have lived in these places know that people want disaster. To participate in the wild Mexican artists there's this whole set of neo-exoticisms that are very much rooted in this notion of disaster. Like if you come from Pakistan, you should make art about disaster. If you come from, you can also make it poetic if you need to, but that's, there's this kind of desire in Europe and in the US, understanding the full complexity of Europe as being endocolonial too and everything, of course, of consuming vicariously many of these disasters, And so this is an opportunity to reflect on it collectively, because there's people in these events from Europe, from the US, but there's also people from these places that kind of experience this pressure in their daily life as artists. On a more personal level, my views, I hate the division of art from everything else. I love your country, and I would go to a museum that has somewhere the memory of the first horse that was ever written. That to me is as worthwhile as any master artwork. And it's for that reason that I propose this extreme scenario of disaster, of trauma, of collective trauma, just as one. Because it's so obvious and so extreme, it forces us to deal with memory and significance. These events just have both. They are significant and they have memory. But it could be many other things. It could be, a labor strike. It could be all kinds of actually totally trivial things that we do not put in the history. I don't think art should deserve a special luxury of being memorable and significant. There's all kinds of other experiences that are not art that I think we should give the same, level, like creative resistances, all kinds of other things, like fiction writing, the science fiction, and so that the piece goes a bit more actually into that imagination.